What is corruption? That is the question. I'm going to talk about it a little bit here today in this speech. In this speech, I will make the argument that there is an incestuous relationship between government, media, and corporations and that it is a problem. These relationships between government, media, and corporations are an issue for a few reasons. Number one, these three entities are some of the primary purveyors of things that are most necessary in a healthy society. Government is in charge of enacting and enforcing laws and legislation. Corporations, businesses, are in charge of providing necessary goods and products. The media is necessary to hold the other two accountable. In my opinion, government and businesses should only be involved as it relates to environmental issues, i.e., the fine should always be more than the cost of a cleanup in an environmental situation. Also, gaming laws, i.e., coordinating setting prices within an industry and monopolization as well. Lastly, paying taxes, obviously, to aid with social programs and public servant salaries, etc. Also, by definition, media is a plural for the term medium, like a paintbrush, a neutral arbiter of information. This is not what we have. Listed below are strong examples and information from scholarly articles that warrant a strong look at this issue. It affects us all. Okay. Listed below is an excerpt from one of the scholarly sources that details how important the control of information is. We examine ownership patterns of newspapers and television, and to a lesser extent, radio in 97 countries around the world. We find that media firms nearly universally have ownership structures with largely controlling shareholders, that these shareholders are either families or governments. This evidence is broadly consistent with the ideas that there is large amenity potential control benefits, otherwise known as control benefits, associated with owning the media, be it political influence or for fame. We then show that countries that are poorer, more autocratic, with lower levels of primary school enrollment and with higher levels of state intervention in this economy, also have greater state ownership of the media. In addition, countries with greater state ownership of the media have less free press, fewer political rights for citizens, inferior governance, less developed capital markets, and inferior health outcomes. This is quoted from a Harvard scholarly paper that I quoted, that I researched. Also given here is a great example of corporate control of mass media. How can a news organization be fair and unbiased when it comes to reporting on the entities that pay their bills? Needless to say, this is a conflict of interest and diminishes the press's ability to be fair and free in these instances. We all see the amount of commercial time for, and this is just an example I give, the commercial time given to large corporations, conglomerates during the news the news segments and news cycles, right? Those are their sponsors. The more views they get, the more ad revenue they're going to make, right? So that's why I use the term crisis capitalism. You're always going to see some type of issue or bombshell. It's always going to be, they want you glued to the news, right? And I'm not saying that there's not legitimate information being passed out among that, but there's also another motive that's being looked at here. That's why I wrote this paper. For example, the United States, this is with politicians involved. For example, in the United States, politicians spend 30 to 70% of their time on fundraising activities aimed primarily at corporations and their interests, which leaves little time to represent citizens in decision-making processes. This reproduces the dependence on corporations' democratic process. And this talks about part of the corporation's involvement in government, right? Which that we all know that's a problem. That's pretty evident. It's not, corruption and lobbying, and the fine line between those two is a big deal. Okay, the power relationships between media and corporate actors are then reproduced due to increased dependence on corporations to fund deliberation spaces. For example, media outlets are shifting their business models to provide free news content, which makes them increasingly dependent on advertising. This also influences how they report on corporate advertisers. Lastly, political influence in the media, where stories are disguised as factual yet can be leading the reader or viewer in a certain direction. Right? These are a big deal. It's kind of like deceptive narrative building and leading the viewer, like it says, in a particular direction, kind of like very subtly, right? So, do the media further their own policy stance through news stories? This is hotly disputed. Communications research has, I believe, thoroughly demolished the idea that news is or can be value free. The canons of bland, objective reporting are perfectly consistent with the selection of quotes and facts, the framing of interpretations, and the attribution of importance through repeated front page headlines, for example. Also, as to report or oppose a particular policy position. Moreover, the canons of objectivity themselves seem to have eroded. Even the formerly gray New York Times now sometimes runs news or unobtrusively labeled analysis, right? Stories full of the colorful, value laden adjectives and adverbs once found only in journals of opinion or Time magazine. And if you notice, if you go back through time and look at some of the older headlines, uh, as opposed to now today, that's a great example. And this is from the University of Maryland study. Okay, so now the counter argument will be, some will say that increased corporate participation within the democratic process is necessary, and this is true. Business does obviously have a role to play in activities that involve the governments, i.e., dealing with environmental issues as well, like I mentioned, as providing public goods and services that are necessary for a functioning and healthy democracy. Even though business does play a role when it comes to environmental impact, as well as obviously supplying society with necessary products, especially for public health services, education, et cetera, right? That's a big deal. Their role still should be limited, in my opinion. What I mean is this: too much influence or cozying with politicians can lead to instances where the cost of a cleanup for a strip mining operation, per se, as an example, can be more expensive than the combined cost of donating to a politician and paying the fine imposed for not cleaning it up properly. This happens throughout our system. Corruptions and payoffs to keep fines lower than the cost of cleanup, fines for naked short selling and financial market manipulation that are just a part of the accepted business. If you can make billions, and you hear about Wall Street all the time. If you can make billions and only have to pay a small percentage to those in charge regulating the markets, that's still a profitable business all day, every day. They're not giving out very much prison time or jail time. They're not taking time away. It's just like the regulators are kind of taking their cut. And that's just kind of what it seems like. Also, the fact that so many people in charge of these entities, like the SEC, the FDA, the NIH, et cetera, predominantly have corporate experience with healthy retirement packages from some of the corporations that they are now in charge of overseeing. This is the definition of a conflict of interest. One might even say that the healthy sum severance package on the way out the door from the corporate world and the government oversight entities is for preferential treatment. I mean, it's kind of hard not to maybe make that connection. I'm not saying it's so, but the potential is there, right? That's a potential for preferential treatment due to the fact that the severance package, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, and health benefits for the rest of your life as you come out of the private sector into government, and now you're sitting on the board of a company that's supposed to oversee the very corporation that you just left. So that's a conflict of interest, and there's a blurry line there. Lastly, by the definition stated earlier of what the media is designed to be, is evident enough that it's important that they are just that: neutral arbiters of information that inform people over protecting or participating in the incestuous relationships that are detailed here. I just wanted to lay that out there. I have the references listed on my outline, the 5 that I used, and this is an important topic to me. I like to share this kind of information to hopefully maybe get more people involved and really kind of seeing through the narratives and the issues that are created, and kind of like, I call it lifting the veil, kind of seeing beyond the veil. And I hope some of this information helps you guys. Thank you for listening.